Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you inspiring tales of resilience, transformation, and triumph. Today, we dive into the extraordinary journey of Jessica, a woman who overcame betrayal, heartbreak, and self-doubt to reclaim her voice and redefine her future. From a courtroom showdown to building a thriving business and empowering others, Jessica's story is a testament to the power of perseverance and self-belief. Don't miss this incredible story of courage and empowerment. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's journey with Life Stories, a story that might just inspire you to rewrite your own. Jessica sat at the polished oak table in the courtroom, her hands trembling as she gripped its edge. The room buzzed with murmurs. A sea of strangers gathered to witness the final unraveling of her marriage. Across the room sat Mark, her soon-to-be ex-husband, his high-profile legal team flanking him like sentinels. His tailored suit fit to perfection, his smirk cold and calculating. To the world, he was a self-made millionaire, a beacon of success. But to Jessica, he was the man who had belittled her, used her kindness against her, and stripped her of dignity over the years. She could still hear his words from the night he informed her of the divorce. "You've never been more than a housewife, Jessica," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you honestly think you can survive without me?" Those words had shattered her already fragile self-worth. And for weeks after, they haunted her in the quiet hours of the night. Yet, here she was, sitting in the very courtroom that symbolized both her end and her beginning. She had spent years as the silent force behind Mark's empire, pouring her time, energy, and even her own finances into his dreams while hers quietly withered away. But Mark had rewritten their history, erasing her contributions to present a narrative of his own brilliance. The weeks leading up to the trial had been a torment. Mutual friends, swayed by Mark's charm and influence, turned their backs on Jessica, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. Even strangers believed his version of events, casting judgment with their eyes before a word had been spoken. Jessica's lawyer, Amanda, was a sharp, composed woman with an innate ability to dissect the truth from layers of deceit. In the days before the trial, she had leaned across the table during one of their meetings and said, "Jessica, this isn't just about your marriage. It's about reclaiming your voice. And I believe in you." Those words stayed with her as the gavel struck sharply, silencing the buzz of the room. Jessica's heart pounded as the judge called the court to order. Mark leaned back in his chair, chuckling under his breath, his confidence unshaken. It was clear he didn't see her as a threat, a thought that gave Jessica a flicker of hope. His overconfidence might just be his greatest weakness. Amanda leaned over to Jessica, whispering, "Stay calm. The truth has a way of speaking for itself." Jessica nodded, though her chest felt tight with nerves. This was the moment she had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. Amanda rose to deliver Jessica's opening statement, her voice measured yet commanding. She painted a vivid picture of Jessica's sacrifices, the career she had put on hold, the personal savings she had invested to kickstart Mark's business, the countless hours she spent managing operations while Mark basked in the spotlight. Jessica was not a passive partner, Amanda declared. She was the cornerstone of Carter Enterprises, and her contributions were indispensable. The courtroom murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Mark's lawyer, a man as polished and smug as his client, stood to counter. His strategy was brutal: discredit Jessica as a dependent woman who clung to Mark's success. He painted her as little more than a bystander, dismissing her sacrifices as inconsequential. Jessica's heart sank as she noticed several observers nodding in agreement. Even the judge's expression seemed to harden. Mark, meanwhile, smirked triumphantly, leaning over to whisper something to his lawyer. For a moment, Jessica's confidence wavered. Had she come this far only to be humiliated yet again? But then Amanda stood again, her tone unwavering. "Mrs. Carter's contributions are not abstract claims," she said, her gaze piercing the courtroom. We have evidence that will prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that her sacrifices and labor built the foundation of the company Mr. Carter now claims as solely his own. Amanda presented the first piece of evidence, a series of financial statements showing how Jessica's personal funds had covered critical expenses during the business's early stages. The murmurs grew louder, the room now abuzz with curiosity. Mark's lawyer attempted to dismiss the evidence, sneering. If Mrs. Carter's involvement was so critical, why is her name missing from any official documents? Surely someone so pivotal would demand recognition. Jessica clenched her hands under the table, her palms clammy. She took a deep breath before speaking for the first time. Because I trusted my husband, she said, her voice soft but firm. I didn't need recognition. I believed in him. I thought his success was ours. Her words hung in the air, silencing the room. Even the judge seemed to pause, absorbing the weight of her statement. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smirk faltering for the first time. Amanda seized the moment, stepping forward with her next revelation. Your Honor, she said, her voice rising slightly, we have further evidence, correspondence, handwritten notes, and a patent registered under Mrs. Carter's name. The courtroom gasped audibly as the documents were handed to the judge. Jessica felt her heart race as the judge studied the pages. The patent, Amanda explained, was for a manufacturing process that had drastically reduced production costs for Carter Enterprises. It was Jessica's innovation, the cornerstone of a deal that had secured the company's first major investor. Mark's lawyer objected, claiming the documents were irrelevant. But Amanda was relentless. This patent was instrumental to the company's success, she argued. And yet Mr. Carter failed to acknowledge his wife's contributions, both financially and intellectually. Mark's confident demeanor finally cracked. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering furiously, his face pale. Jessica dared to glance at him, and for the first time, she saw something unexpected in his eyes, doubt. The rest of the day was a blur. Witnesses testified. Evidence was debated. And Jessica held her ground through a grueling cross-examination. Every word she spoke felt like an act of defiance, a reclaiming of the voice she had lost over the years. By the end of the session, as the courtroom adjourned, Jessica walked out with her head held high. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. The truth, she realized, was a powerful force, and it was finally on her side. The courtroom victory marked the end of one chapter in Jessica's life, but it was far from the conclusion of her journey. As she left the courthouse that day, clutching Amanda's hand in gratitude, the enormity of what lay ahead loomed large. Jessica wasn't just stepping away from a toxic marriage, she was stepping into a world she had spent years watching from the sidelines. For the first time, she had to figure out who she was beyond the shadow of Mark's overbearing presence. The weeks after the trial were a blur of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a cautious sense of hope. Jessica moved back into a modest apartment she had rented in Brooklyn, far removed from the sprawling townhouse she once shared with Mark. The space was small but bright, with large windows that overlooked a bustling street below. At night, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, she felt a strange combination of peace and loneliness. The silence was new to her, both liberating and daunting. Her first task was to address her role in Carter Enterprises. Jessica now owned 50% of the company, and while she wasn't ready to dive into the high-stakes corporate world, she knew she couldn't simply remain a silent shareholder. She requested a meeting with the employees, many of whom had worked under Mark's leadership for years. When she entered the boardroom for the first time since the trial, Jessica felt a wave of anxiety. The polished table, the crisp suits, the air of formality, it all felt like Mark's territory. But as she began to speak, her voice steady and clear, she noticed something unexpected. The employees were listening. Really listening. I want this company to reflect the people who built it, Jessica said, her gaze sweeping across the room. For too long. Your voices have been overlooked. I know what that feels like. And I'm here to change it. There was a moment of silence before one of the senior managers, a woman named Grace, stood and began to applaud. Slowly. The rest of the room followed. Jessica felt a warmth rise in her chest. A flicker of the confidence she had almost forgotten she possessed. In the weeks that followed, Jessica worked closely with Grace and other managers to restructure the company's culture. She introduced policies to support employee well-being, opened avenues for feedback, and began highlighting the contributions of those who had been overshadowed during Mark's tenure. The changes didn't go unnoticed. For the first time in years, the office buzzed with optimism, and Jessica felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing she was making a real difference. But her journey wasn't limited to reclaiming her role in the company. Jessica had a dream of her own, one she had shelved long ago. Before meeting Mark, she had envisioned starting her own consultancy firm, a place where she could use her creativity and strategic mind to empower small businesses. Now, with her share of Carter Enterprises and the validation of her abilities, that dream felt within reach. Jessica spent long nights at her kitchen table, sifting through old sketches and business plans she had tucked away in a forgotten box. Each page felt like a piece of her younger self, a woman full of ideas and hope, untainted by years of doubt and compromise. She decided to name her firm Blueprint Strategies, a nod to the careful planning and foresight that had always been her strengths. Her first client was a small family-owned bakery in Queens, struggling to stay afloat. The owners, a kind elderly couple named Maria and Frank, welcomed Jessica into their business with open arms. They were on the verge of closing, their debts mounting and their spirits low. Jessica threw herself into the project with everything she had, creating a comprehensive plan to reduce costs, streamline operations, and introduce creative marketing strategies. Within months, the bakery was thriving. Customers flocked to its warm, inviting storefront, drawn by the charm Jessica had helped cultivate. Maria and Frank's gratitude was overwhelming, and their success felt deeply personal to Jessica. For the first time, she realized that her work wasn't just about numbers or strategies, it was about people. About empowering them to see the potential they hadn't yet realized. Word of Jessica's talent spread quickly. Small business owners began seeking her out, drawn by her reputation for turning struggling ventures into flourishing enterprises. Yet, as her professional life flourished, Jessica remained grounded by a close-knit group of friends who had stood by her through the darkest days of her marriage. Karen, her best friend and a savvy PR professional, became Jessica's unofficial guide to navigating her newfound success. Over late-night glasses of wine, they would strategize how to balance Jessica's work with the media attention her story had garnered. "You've become a force to be reckoned with," Karen said one evening, raising her glass in a toast. "And you've done it all with such grace." Jessica smiled, feeling a swell of gratitude for the people who had supported her. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," she replied. "When everything fell apart, you reminded me of who I was." Her network of friends became a lifeline, offering advice, encouragement, and occasional doses of tough love. Together, they helped Jessica navigate the complexities of rebuilding her life while staying true to her newfound purpose. As Jessica's consultancy firm grew, so did her confidence. She no longer saw herself as the woman Mark had once belittled. She was a leader, a visionary, and a mentor to others. And while the pain of the past still lingered, it no longer defined her. Jessica was finally writing her own story, one where she held the pen and the possibilities were endless. Jessica's life flourished as she poured herself into Blueprint Strategies, her consultancy firm, and her renewed role at Carter Enterprises. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, and with each small victory, she felt a growing sense of pride in her ability to stand on her own. But while Jessica thrived, Mark's world began to crumble. The courtroom trial had drawn significant attention, and Mark's once spotless reputation was no longer untouchable. Investors, clients, and colleagues who had once admired him began to view him with suspicion. The carefully curated image of a self-made millionaire began to crack under the weight of the evidence Jessica and Amanda had presented. Whispers of his dishonesty spread quickly through the business world, amplified by Jessica's emergence as a symbol of resilience and truth. Jessica didn't gloat over Mark's decline, at least. Not outwardly. A part of her felt vindicated, but she was determined not to let his failures define her success. Still, the fallout was impossible to ignore. Mark's largest investors began pulling out of deals, citing concerns about his integrity and leadership. His legal team worked tirelessly to stem the tide of bad press, but it seemed every public statement he made only worsened the damage. His refusal to acknowledge Jessica's contributions, something so evident in the courtroom, left him isolated and unrelatable in the eyes of his peers. Samantha, Mark's once loyal legal assistant and rumored lover, was among the first to abandon ship. She handed in her resignation without notice, leaving a short email that read, "I can't be part of this anymore." It was a devastating blow to Mark's crumbling empire, and one that seemed to cement his undoing. By the end of the quarter, Carter Enterprises had lost 2 of its largest contracts, forcing Mark to step down as CEO. For Jessica, this moment was bittersweet. She had no desire to see Mark fail so spectacularly, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching justice unfold. The man who had so ruthlessly dismissed her as irrelevant was now facing the consequences of his arrogance and deceit. Yet, Jessica knew better than to linger in the shadow of his downfall. She had her own path to carve, and it was time to focus entirely on her future. Blueprint Strategies was rapidly gaining traction. Jessica's approach to consultancy was as empathetic as it was strategic. She didn't just provide solutions, she listened, understood, and empowered her clients to envision the possibilities within their grasp. Each project brought her closer to the heart of what she loved, working with people who had big dreams but limited resources. Just like Maria and Frank, her first clients. One of Jessica's proudest moments came when she was approached by Evelyn James, a prominent business leader with a reputation for mentoring young entrepreneurs. Evelyn had followed Jessica's story and was impressed by her courage and innovative mind. When Jessica walked into Evelyn's office for their first meeting, she felt an odd mix of excitement and intimidation. Evelyn's presence was commanding, her sharp grey eyes sparkling with curiosity as she extended a hand. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," Evelyn said, motioning for Jessica to sit. Determined, underestimated, and ready to prove the world wrong. The meeting ended with an offer that was too good to refuse. Evelyn proposed a partnership that would allow Jessica to scale Blueprint Strategies while maintaining the personal touch that had made it so successful. Evelyn's mentorship proved invaluable. She taught Jessica how to navigate larger projects, manage high-stakes negotiations, and expand her business without compromising her values. Under Evelyn's guidance, Blueprint Strategies began taking on clients from across the country, earning a reputation as one of the most innovative consultancies for small and medium-sized enterprises. Jessica's professional life soared to heights she never imagined possible. Her work earned her several accolades, including an Entrepreneur of the Year award. Standing at the podium during the award ceremony, holding the gleaming trophy, Jessica took a moment to reflect on her journey. "This award isn't just for me," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "It's for every person who has been told they aren't enough, for every dream deferred, for every sacrifice that went unnoticed. If my story teaches anything, it's that your worth isn't defined by someone else's opinion. It's defined by the impact you choose to make." The room erupted into applause, but Jessica barely heard it over the rush of emotions welling inside her. For years, she had been dismissed and underestimated. But now, her voice carried the weight of experience and triumph. Across the room, Evelyn gave her a subtle nod of approval, a gesture that filled Jessica with quiet pride. Meanwhile, Mark's life continued to spiral. His attempts to rebuild his reputation only highlighted his arrogance, alienating him further from the business community. He moved out of the Manhattan townhouse, trading it for a smaller apartment on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in years, he was completely alone. Jessica, however, refused to let his struggles consume her thoughts. She had spent enough of her life in his shadow. Her focus now was on growing blueprint strategies and mentoring others. Just as Evelyn had mentored her, she began hosting workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs, sharing her story and the lessons she had learned. These events were more than just business seminars, they were acts of empowerment. Each one a ripple in the wave of change Jessica hoped to inspire. Through it all, Jessica never forgot the people who had supported her during her darkest moments. Karen and her close-knit group of friends remained a constant presence in her life, offering guidance and laughter in equal measure. On quiet evenings, they gathered in Jessica's apartment, reminiscing about how far she had come. "Do you ever think about what you've accomplished?" Karen asked one night, raising her glass in a toast. "You've rebuilt yourself from the ground up. And you've done it with more grace than most people could manage." Jessica smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "When I doubted myself, you reminded me who I was. That's something I'll never forget." As she sipped her wine, Jessica thought about the road ahead. She was no longer the woman Mark had tried to diminish. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to create a legacy of her own. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Jessica's success with blueprint strategies and her role in revitalizing Carter Enterprises brought her a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. Yet, as her professional life flourished, she realized that there was one final piece of her journey left to confront: closure with Mark. It came unexpectedly, in the form of a letter. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably his. And for a moment, Jessica considered tossing it aside. What could he possibly have to say now? But curiosity and a lingering sense of unfinished business prompted her to open it. The letter was surprisingly sincere. Mark's usual bravado was absent, replaced by what seemed to be genuine regret. He wrote about the months he had spent reflecting on his mistakes and the loneliness he now faced. "Jessica," he wrote, "losing you was the greatest mistake of my life. I've come to realize how much I took you for granted. How blind I was to the sacrifices you made for me. I'll carry that regret forever. And I hope, one day, you can forgive me." Jessica sat with the letter for a long time, emotions swirling within her. It wasn't the apology that moved her, it was the realization that she no longer needed it. She had built a life beyond his shadow. A life that was fulfilling and entirely her own. Mark's acknowledgement of her worth, while overdue, was no longer essential for her to feel whole. She penned a brief reply, one that reflected her newfound strength and clarity. "Mark, I hope you find peace in your journey, as I have in mine. I've moved forward and wish you the best as you do the same." With that, she sealed the envelope and let go of the last remnants of their shared past. It felt like releasing a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. A few weeks later, Jessica attended a networking event hosted by Evelyn's firm. The room was alive with energy, filled with ambitious entrepreneurs and seasoned professionals exchanging ideas and possibilities. Jessica moved through the crowd with confidence, engaging in meaningful conversations about business, innovation, and mentorship. She was in her element, thriving in a space she had once felt excluded from. Then, across the room, she spotted a familiar figure. Mark. He looked older, his once impeccable suit slightly wrinkled, his confident air diminished. Their eyes met, and he approached her hesitantly. "Jessica," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jessica offered a polite smile, feeling no anger, no sadness, just a quiet sense of distance. "Hello, Mark. It's been a long time." Their conversation was brief and civil. Mark spoke of his struggles and his attempts to rebuild his life. Jessica listened, her heart steady. As they parted ways, she realized she felt no animosity, only closure. Mark's choices had shaped her past, but they no longer defined her future. That evening, as she sat by her apartment window, watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky, Jessica reflected on how far she had come. The struggles, the heartbreak, the triumphs, they had all led her to this moment. For the first time in years, she felt a profound sense of contentment. She had reclaimed her voice, her identity, and her purpose. Her life was no longer dictated by the expectations of others but by the choices she made for herself. As her story continued to gain national attention, Jessica became a symbol of resilience and empowerment. Articles and interviews highlighted her journey from betrayal to triumph, and social media buzzed with hashtags like #JessicaStrong. Her inbox overflowed with messages from people who found inspiration in her story. One email stood out. It was from a young woman named Ella who wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to leave a toxic relationship and start over. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to reclaim your life." Jessica read the email several times, her eyes welling with tears. It reminded her that her journey wasn't just about her. It was about creating a ripple effect of hope and empowerment. Encouraged by her friends and Evelyn, Jessica agreed to a televised interview. She spoke candidly about her experiences, recounting the years of sacrifice and betrayal with honesty and grace. By the end of the interview, the host was in tears, and the audience gave her a standing ovation. The overwhelming response affirmed that her story resonated far beyond the walls of her own life. Among the many opportunities that followed was an invitation from Evelyn to collaborate on a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. The program, aptly named Blueprint for Change, aimed to provide resources, guidance, and community support for those starting their own businesses. Jessica embraced the project wholeheartedly, seeing it as a way to pay forward the lessons she had learned. Over the next 2 years, Blueprint Strategies grew into a nationally recognized consultancy, celebrated for its transformative impact on small and medium-sized businesses. Jessica's work earned her several accolades, including an Entrepreneur of the Year award. Standing on the stage, holding the gleaming trophy, she addressed the audience with the same authenticity that had carried her through her darkest days. "This award," she said, her voice steady and clear, "isn't just for me. It's for every person who has been told they aren't enough. For every dream deferred. For every sacrifice that went unnoticed. If my story teaches anything, it's that your worth isn't defined by someone else's opinion. It's defined by the impact you choose to make." The applause was deafening, and as Jessica looked out into the audience, she saw Evelyn nodding approvingly from the front row. It was a moment of triumph, not just for her but for everyone who had ever been overlooked or undervalued. Jessica's story had become more than a tale of personal growth, it was a beacon of hope for others. And as she continued to build her legacy, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the life she had created was her own, built on a foundation of strength, courage, and an unshakable belief in herself. As Jessica sat by the window of her office, gazing out at the city skyline, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of betrayal and heartbreak, she had risen stronger, forging a life defined by her courage, resilience, and vision. Her firm, Blueprint Strategies, was thriving, transforming countless lives, and her mentorship program was empowering a new generation of entrepreneurs. The letter from Mark, the courtroom battles, and even her darkest days now felt like distant memories. They had shaped her, yes, but they no longer defined her. Jessica had discovered her own strength and, in doing so, had inspired others to find theirs. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jessica smiled, knowing her journey was far from over. There were still stories to write, lives to touch, and dreams to chase. Her legacy would not just be one of success but of hope and empowerment for all who heard her story. Thank you for following Jessica's incredible journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Life Stories, for more inspiring tales of resilience, transformation, and triumph. Together, let's celebrate the power of the human spirit.